Good afternoon, design, construction, and real estate professionals, and thank you for logging in for the role of leaders, managers, and peers in tackling racism and oppression. My name is Jennifer, and I am with Williams Engineering Canada, and we are proud to be the session sponsor. Williams Engineering is a collection of technical leaders and engineering professionals in Western and Northern Canada who are dedicated to designing and creating the most innovative solutions for our clients. Our core purpose is to brighten the lives of people in our communities by engineering sustainable cities that are safe, inclusive, and resilient. I'm pleased to welcome our moderator, Dr. Laurie Campbell, who has worked in the fields of education, diversity, and equity for over 30 years. Notably, she directed the first Aboriginal teacher education program at the University of Alberta. She was Senior Manager of Diversity and Inclusion for Enbridge Pipelines, leading and implementing a company-wide D&I strategy in Canada and the US. For her role in making a difference in the lives of people in the workforce and society, in 2015, Dr. Campbell was recognized by Diversity Canada as one of the top 10 influential women in human resources and diversity. She currently serves as principal of the Coburn Institute for Inclusive Leadership at Northwest College, helping organizations enhance employee engagement and bolster innovation by implementing practical and effective diversity and inclusion initiatives and programs. Dr. Campbell will moderate the panel discussion and help us to listen, welcome differences, and think more inclusively. I ask that you give your full attention to Dr. Laurie Campbell and the panelists for the role of leaders, managers, and peers in tackling racism and oppression. Dr. Laurie Campbell.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Jennifer. It's my pleasure and my honor to be here moderating this important panel. I want to start by taking the opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 6 where I am located, and to acknowledge the treaty areas across Canada where my audience and our peers are located as well. So as Jennifer mentioned, this is a really important conversation that many organizations are having right now around the issues of racism, oppression, inclusion, and diversity. And since the events of March, the killing of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, protests that have happened, I think there's been a real energy in organizations to foreground a discussion around racism and oppression and look to our leaders to lead those discussions, to make room for those discussions, and to learn from our colleagues, especially our BIPOC colleagues within our organizations. So I'm really interested in learning from our panel today about their experiences in organizations, how things have changed for them, and some of their thoughts and ideas going forward on how we tackle these really important issues that affect all of us. Okay, I'd like to welcome Obi Okeke. Obi has completed his mechanical engineering master's at the University of Saskatchewan in 2019. He joined Williams Engineering in 2019 and moved from Victoria from the University of Saskatchewan. He has been working on his professional engineering designation while working at Williams Engineering and is a soccer and basketball fan. Welcome, Obi.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Nassim Bashir. Nassim is President and CEO of Williams Engineering Canada and Chairman of the Board of the Williams Group of Companies. Nassim leads a team of professionals in Alberta, BC, Northwest Territories, and is involved in a variety of projects, both commercial and residential. He's a very involved community member, has done a lot of work with the International Airport, is Director of Wastewater Solutions Edmonton. He's an electrical engineer by trade, and I understand that he has worked and lived in close to 50, or that is the goal, of 50 communities in the world. That's a remarkable travel itinerary.
Travel, yes.
Welcome, Nassim. Nassim is Obi's leader. Next, I'd like to introduce Kondwani, or Ko, as he's called. He works for the Calgary Municipal Land Corporation, joining them in 2008, and leads their financial strategy as well as their HR strategy. Twandi or Co. is from Ernst & Young Chartered Accountants, and he's done a lot of development in the industry from many different angles. He's worked on U.S. projects and is responsible for a whole portfolio at CMLC, as well as a board member with the Association of Zimbabweans in Calgary. Next, I'd like to introduce Amber and welcome Amber Osaden-Allman, who's their Senior Development Manager at the Calgary Municipal Land Corporation. She joined them in 2014 and brings 9 years of land development expertise. She's really excited about projects that are sustainable and is a sought-after speaker, has done some teaching for the University of Calgary. She holds a Bachelor of Policy Studies from Mount Royal and a Bachelor of Arts with high honors in Regional and Urban Planning from the University of Saskatchewan. So welcome, Amber. Okay, so we're ready for our first question. I'd like to start out with asking you to do some personal reflection. So since March and the Black Lives Matter movement, I wonder how that might have impacted you personally, if it's shifted your perception about your place in the world, about your identity in organizations and in your community. Can you tell me a little bit about what's resonated for you since those events? Let me start with you, Co.
Thank you, and thanks for the kind introduction. Since March, a lot of things obviously have changed. Specifically, when I think about myself and my family, I immigrated to Canada in 2001, and as a new immigrant, racism and oppression were not things that were in my forefront. I moved to Montreal, and it wasn't something that I thought of very much at that particular moment, having been predominantly a majority moving from Zimbabwe. However, with what has been transpiring over the past few months, specifically in March, and having a son now who is 17 years old, turning 18 in a few months, personally, it obviously hit home pretty hard in terms of actually starting to have those difficult conversations with my son of how society really is and how the perception of society for him versus the rest of the world or the rest of of humankind, so to speak. And so, and I also have twins that are 7 years old, and obviously they listen to the news, they understand what's going on. So having difficult conversations of just what had happened, why it had happened, and why it is not right, and what his place in society is and what their place in society are, and how I view it from the perspective that I am also a Black man who, though I'm a leader in my organization, that doesn't transform when I'm out in the public. So from my perspective, just in terms of impact, it has changed the way that I sort of view the world, from specifically the future and the future for my children, and hoping that there are things that organizations, society, governments, meaning the municipal government, can do to change that view and to change how people of color are looked at.
So new conversations with your children that you may not have had before, it sounds like.
Yes, and questions. I mean, we have had conversations. I've always known, and I've always seen, I've experienced, but in terms of actually having that direct conversation, it started recently. However, some of the conversations were not directed towards his skin color. It was directed towards his behavior as a human being, and his behavior as a teenager, and his behavior as a boy. When he plays basketball, I coached him basketball. And so what I always wanted him to understand is his actions on the basketball court are a reflection of him and a reflection of myself. And so if he is going to behave a certain way, people are going to look at him in that particular manner, not mentioning the idea that he is different from the perspective that he is Black. But that became a subject that I actually had to actually start talking about, and saying part of the reason why we have these conversations is because of the perception that society or the people around you are going to have of you, just based on a certain type of behavior that might be directed towards, or might be normal for everyone else, but is not considered to be normal for you, and it's considered to be a bit threatening in a way.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Nassim, what about you? What's resonated for you and stuck with you?
Oh, this a couple of perspectives I think is one is that it reminded me of when I was growing up and being also an immigrant, even though I sound like been here all my life, it's pretty close to mostly being here all my life, but I immigrated to Canada a long time ago. So it reminded me of growing up and being a biracial kid in school. That wasn't really that big a deal, I think, for me in terms of my reflection, but it started to get me thinking of a couple of places. One is that in our company and the relationship that we have with all of the diverse people that we have in our organization, and also with my children. And if you look at my children, you can't tell that all of my kids are my kids, even though they are. They all are very different in terms of how they look, and it's interesting to see how they show up differently from the outside looking in. And that reminded me of the occasional sort of conversation that we've had in the community, shall we say, where I remember somebody asking my wife once, "Are all of our children from the same father?" Which was,
Oh,
I took it as a bit of a joke, as as it was, but that was the reality of the way that people saw it, right? But really, for me, since March, the biggest thing is really I think that it was important in our company that we start to have a conversation about our own privilege and our relationship with the Indigenous people of Canada, and also to start to have that conversation about is racism in Canada systemic or not. And I believe that it is. It's just it is very well hidden and put into dark places that most people usually don't talk about. And I thought it was important that we start that conversation and recognize that there is that kind of racism in Canada. It's just it's hidden from, especially for me. I feel very privileged in the role I have, the job I have, the career I have, and the person I am. But not everybody has that same privilege. And so it really meant that it was time to start to talk about it in the company along with all the other things that were going on. And so I think the acceleration of COVID in back in March really made it important for me to talk a lot more to the company about what was on my mind and to share those thoughts. We were so far apart from each other. We're all working from home, and all these other things are going on. It was important for me to start to connect more about these bigger issues that all of our people were going through on their own, not in sort of the workplace per se, because we're all working from home at that time. And I think Obi will probably remember that one email that I sent out where I said it's time to take this on and start talking about it, because I think it's kind of the only way to really start to move towards understanding that we are all different, and some people think of us differently than we would want them to. And if we're not talking about it, then it's still under the rug, and it can't be under the rug. It has to be on top, and it has to be full front and center for us to be able to truly try to eliminate it. If and when time lets us do that.
right. I'm hoping to get to some of those resources and tools and supports that we need to do that really effectively in organizations. But Obi, I want to ask you, when you got that email, what was your reaction?
Honestly, I mean, it was it was a welcome email, because I think, over time, we've generally liked to have, put this type of conversation under the carpet. We sweep it, saying, it's not really apparent, and things like that. So I think, if anything, if there's one takeaway that from the March event, is that it's brought this conversation forward. There's no longer an excuse not to have this conversation. And again, I share some of the experiences of Co too, in the sense that I moved here. I was majority. I never really realized that I had a different color. I could perceived differently. It was not something that that was forefront in my mind. I usually, my typical belief is, you go out, you do what you have to do, and then you get the results for what you do. And moving down here and then seeing a bit of a shift in it, actually was a shift for me in the way I had to approach things. The way I had to have conversations, and and how I had to behave. Is this you now have to take a look and then reflect and say, well, hope the person that I'm trying to speak to or having a conversation with doesn't perceive things differently. And I think this types of conversation again is very welcome, because it will allow us share experiences and learn, so that at the end of the day, once we're able to share those experiences and come together, I think we can then start moving ahead and tackling the whole issue of racism and oppression.
Right, right. The conversations really are welcome and badly needed, but sometimes difficult. And Amber, I'm wondering, the conversations that we're talking about that either are happening or are going to happen, how do you feel about them in terms of the events post-March? Do you think that your listening of the kind of lived experiences of colleagues and friends and so on has changed since then? Or tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think personally for me, growing up, and I know this is one of your later questions about like when was the first time you experienced and began to think more and more about racism. And I think, especially as a white person, you're taught like, don't be racist. And what does that mean to not be racist? And it wasn't until the events of March that I didn't really realize that that's not enough. That's not nearly enough. I need to be anti-racist. And what does anti-racist mean? It means actually contributing towards the solution. I think often, especially as a white person, we look at the past and we say, oh, what we did was great, and then that's good. And we're not maybe as willing to sit with what the lived experience is of other people, and then work towards what is the future. And I think being a lot more vulnerable and honest in that conversation is much needed.
Right. Yes. The theme about conversation, I wanted to pick that up, especially your the stories that you need to share with your children now, and the kind of conversations you're having with them. There is this sort of starting place where we're talking about conversation and dialogue. But I wanted to ask you, within your organizations, how is it that you can create the kind of psychologically safe space for those conversations to happen? What is that going to take in terms of the skills you want your peers and colleagues to develop, like empathy, or it's the kind of stories that can be difficult to tell, difficult to hear, and kind of increase vulnerability. So tell me a bit more about how you would shape that within your organizations.
Oh yeah, just to follow up from what Amber said in terms of vulnerability, and to your questions in terms of conversations, the biggest thing for me, and I've said this internally, is the ability to want to have the conversations to begin with. It's the dialogue. It's trying, or at least making an effort to put yourself in someone else's shoes and listen to someone else's experiences. Because when we started off in March and the conversation started, yes, there were certain people within the organization. We're not very big. There's about 28 of us now, but at the onset, there were certain individuals, including Amber, that called me just to find out how I am. Right? Just let's have a conversation. I just want to know how you are, and that's all. And that's what, at that particular moment, as a person of color or as a black man, that's what I was looking to get, or not get, but at least start the conversation. And then internally, I could tell there was some discomfort with other people in having the conversation, because we are not racist, right? So why are we having the conversation? Until you actually push through the barrier of saying, well, no, let's unwind that a little bit. Let's figure out what that actually means. Can I tell you my experiences? And then the answer is, yeah, let's talk about your experiences. And I tell them my experiences, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, I didn't realize that was what was going on. I always felt as though you're another person and this is what's happening, and I get that. But if we don't have the conversations, then you cannot be an ally, because you don't understand what I go through. I don't understand what other people go through unless we actually start talking about it, and that's where it all starts. So I believe within our organization now, the dialogue is beginning to happen. We're beginning to have a situation where people are actually comfortable having a conversation. We have a diversity and inclusion workshop coming up on Friday, where initially it only started with 3 individuals volunteering for it. Now we have more than almost half of the organization wanting to be a part of it. So
that's great.
So that's an indication that that dialogue and the conversation and people realizing that something they need to do more than just um, tell themselves that they're not racist and leave it at that, but be an ally and start having the conversation. And it just doesn't end with core. And I've said that it's not about core, right? It's about racism in general. It's about racism to black people, indigenous people, people of color. Let's figure that out, and let's figure out in your organization what processes and procedures we're putting in place that are going to be actionable for everyone to be able to move forward with talking about this.
Great. So you've sort of cleared some space for a dialogue rather than sort of people were worried about accusations and being labeled and so on, but you're just inviting people to the conversation.
Yes,
Sounds
and
great.
I'm hoping, and Amber can smile. I'm hoping that's what I'm doing, or she can frown and say, "No, you're not." But that's what I'm hoping I'm doing from perspective of making people feel comfortable and just understand that at the core of it all, we are human beings, and we are all loving human beings.
Yes. Anyone else want to add to that? That whole issue of safety, psychological safety in particular, with difficult dialogues or unfamiliar dialogues?
I'll jump in just quickly. Sorry, I'm seeing if you were about to say something and I'm jumping on. No, that you were just breathing. Okay.
Right.
I was going to say that one of the things I think that Co said that really resonated with me, and I think people are just scared to say the wrong thing. I mean, even being invited to this panel, my initial reaction is like, oh no, I'm going to get recorded. I'm going to say something racist. It's going to go viral. I'm like, no, that's the bigger issue. I should be engaging in this and I should be willing to have a conversation. And especially as a white person, I need to be vulnerable to say, I'm not always getting it right, but I'm here to keep getting it right and learn and listen and ask questions. And I think it's that there's a big piece about so many people are scared of having a conversation because they're not going to get it right. And we need to remove that because it's getting it wrong by not having the conversation.
Yeah, if I could just also add to that, I also think too that there's also the factor like Cole mentioned that having a conversation about racism doesn't essentially it doesn't mean that you're a racist, and I think that's the first thing that people need to realize. These conversations are about experiences, and then in general how to make the world a much safer space for everyone. So if we get to the point where we understand that this conversation is necessary and there's no blame, and being part of that conversation is being part of the solution, I think then that's when we start to make the necessary steps to go forward.
I find it really interesting to, since the beginning of this, to go out and sort of seek new opportunities to meet new people and to go and have conversations with them that even outside of the organization and in it, it's truly enlightening to share a meal or a coffee with somebody that you wouldn't have normally shared a coffee with because they, it sounds a little bit strange because they don't look like you, right? And it's but what it does, I think, is you get to realize that there's a real person on the other side of the perceptions that you have. And through that process, I think you end up starting to get to understand that, like Co was saying, that really we're all the same. We all have the same things. Co was talking about his kids. I'm worried about my kids too, and everybody has the same concerns and the same perspectives, but it's very difficult for people to start that conversation. And in our company, if you looking from a company perspective, we started off. I think it was last year when we started talking about diversity and inclusion, or D&I sort of view of things. Laura, you've been involved with that at the Goldman Institute, and to get us to primarily be looking at gender equality, being an engineering firm, we were very more concerned about that than anything else. There's 20% of engineers or so are females, and it's a very small amount. My daughter's in engineering school, and so she's going to be the ultra feminist engineer, which is awesome. She's kicking the boys' butts around the classroom right now, at least virtually. So when it starts to come home, when you realize that, in terms of that kind of DNA, you start to realize that this is really important to me, because I don't want to have people that are close close to me, people I know to be affected by it tend to pay less attention to people we don't know. But when it's personal and it's home, it's your people and it's your company, your employees, your teammates, your friends, then it's very personal, and it's time to get involved, and to better understanding people helps you sort of break those barriers down. So as a company, we still have a lot to figure out. We don't. This is new for us, as Obi knows, around this conversation. But there are so many things to talk about around equality in general, and feeling like that everybody is equal, and knowing that everybody is equal is a bit of a journey to figure that out. And like everybody else has said here, the only way we're going to get there is to talk about it more. So as a company, we've got a long way to go, I think, to achieve what it is that we want to achieve. But it's going to be worth it, and I really think it is. In when it comes to to just put my CEO hat on for a moment and say, screw it on tight, and say, look, if we really want to perform, we need to have an awesome team where everybody's in. And that means that all the other usual stuff has to be gone. The barriers have to be gone. We can't think of us versus them. We all have to be on the same team. It's all a matter about the jersey. That's it's the thing on the front of the jersey that matters more than anything else, is that we're all in the same team trying to do the same things together. And we can break down the rest of those barriers, and we talk about it now more recently in terms of innovation. And I know it sounds a little bit off, but it is really part of innovating and re-innovating companies to get rid of all the noise that we've been dragging around with us for so long. And I think that leads to success in whatever you want to define success as. And often when it comes to running companies, it usually means performance, and it usually means profit. And that's a really good thing when we're all on the same page trying to achieve the things that we need to do, because that helps our people. It helps everybody.
Yeah, that's an interesting. It's interesting to end on that note, because it's one of the questions I've got around the reconciliation of certain kind of mandates within organizations. So there's more. I think particularly in the sort of domain of corporate social responsibility, there's been quite a movement to think about it more than just we've given certain amounts of money to certain organizations, or we sponsor certain kinds of things. Those old corporate social responsibility reports of old. And moving more and more to look at the UN goals, think about sustainability, and now I think more and more to social justice. So I'm wondering if you can speak to, as organizational folks and with your organizational hats on, where you think how the organization reconciles profit and social justice. Those sorts of those sorts of tensions, if they are tensions in your organization.
Well, maybe I'll start off, Laurie, on that, because it's a big part of our focus on strategy and purpose, has been for the last 3 years now, is where we put the UN Sustainable Development Goals at the center of our business as our purpose as a company, and Jennifer led off with that in the beginning. And that is, I think, unique in terms of we have a circular sort of and outwardly growing business model where we put our purpose at the center. Often companies will put their customers at the center, and I get that. That makes a lot of sense to want to do that. But in our case, we put our purpose at the center of our model, because fundamentally, if you derive purpose in a company and then build from that purpose, and in other words, why do you exist? Why do you do the things that you do? And then you build on that based on how you do things, and then what you do is how we've built our business model. I think it gets you more focused on what it is that we're trying to do for the people around us. And the outcome of that is actually performance. It is business performance that comes from focusing on those kinds of things. And it is, in a way, a welcome and primarily getting back to the roots of capitalism view of how companies should be built. And so people would say that capitalism is broken today, and I think it primarily is, because it is all profit driven, and it doesn't necessarily need to be all profit driven. It needs to be purpose driven. That's the reason why companies exist, to drive a purpose, to support a community, and your people that work with you, and then the outcome is success for both the company and the community. That's the way I think that companies should be built.
Amber, I know you have a great interest in sustainable communities and sustainable building, sustainable land use. Tell me a bit more about that in this conversation.
Yeah. Do you mind actually if I just go back to something Nassim had said in your earlier
No, not at
question?
all. No.
And just to play off of that, because I thought what you were talking about being purpose driven, it was so powerful. And thinking about how, or your question, is there a tension between profit and
Yeah.
having a diverse perspective? One of the things we've been looking, or what we're starting to incorporate to do in a lot of our procurement, I mentioned we're a small company. And so we rely a great deal on a lot of our consultants, such as Williams Engineering and others, to make us successful. And so when we go out and we bid different projects, we're now incorporating diversity and inclusion into the question of what are you guys doing as a company to answer and address this. And I think it's come up in the past when we've done interviews with different teams and firms to understand when we're sitting across the table and we're doing an interview for a large project, there's only one perspective sitting at that table. And how is that going to benefit the project and make it better at the end of the day? And if profit is part of the success criteria and a number of other things, having that one perspective isn't going to get there. So I think to that point and to that end, it's incredibly important to have that diverse perspective. And I think there are a number of ways we can achieve that. And I certainly Nassim address that a little bit more. And sorry, Laurie, to track it off here.
That's what I wanted you to speak to. Nassim's point about that's what I was trying to invite you to speak to. So that was great.
Okay. I don't know, Cole, if you have anything more to add to that.
Go ahead, Cole.
No, go ahead, Obi. It's okay.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm just going to speak from an employee perspective. You know, in terms of profitability and how well I can do my job, it also it definitely relates to how I feel or how comfortable I am within any space. And you know, there's no getting away from the fact that you know, we have these issues on ground. So if companies don't start to realize that it's important to tackle those issues, you know, my mental health at that time doing my job, the way I approach my job, the way I probably even relate to my coworkers, you know, it all affects it. It's all part of that same kettle, right? And once you know, when you have that space and you're able to efficiently, and you're bothering about, you know, issues such as racism or oppression, or you don't see some of these things, you know, you're in a much better space where you're able to kind of handle the task that you have. You're on point, and I mean, inherently the company ends up being even more profitable.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great point. So you're going to add to that?
Oh no, I was just going to add to what Obi said. You know, ultimately, what it is, and again, speaking for myself, it's one of those things where you, if it's not addressed within an organization, it does impact the way that the employees are going to relate to the organization. Ultimately, it will also start impacting the bottom line of the organization. I can just giving an example that is personal, which is the code that comes to work on Monday to Friday is a different code that leaves work on Friday evening and goes home and is with his friends on Saturday and Sunday, and then has to adjust his mind frame so
Right.
that when he gets to work, he portrays an acceptable or the norm that the business or the organization or society looks for in an individual like myself. And that can also have a mental toll on someone in terms of just how they're going to be relating to their peers, because ultimately when I walk into the office and I'm talking to people, it's about our experiences as human beings. It's not about my experiences as a black man or my experiences as a white woman or as a white man. No, I'm human. And so over the weekend, these are the experiences that I had, and I shouldn't have feel as though I would get judged for who I am and what I have done or my culture or whatever it is. I should have a safe space and psychologically feel as though I can share who I am, and I can be the same person that I was on Saturday and on Wednesday, and I'm at work, and the people that are around me feel comfortable being around me because there's nothing different than any of us. So that's an important element. I know it sounds it sounds like it's centered on me as an individual, but I'm sure if we were to put a few people around, they would probably feel the same way. But it also does then, when you take a look at our strategy, to Amber's point, in terms of beginning to ask the difficult questions to our consultants and putting it in our procurement documents and saying we need to understand what you are doing in your organization. And then it also, the other advantage that we have is we have a fantastic leader at CMLC, and she is not shy, and Amber can tell you that she will challenge you directly, and she will actually ask you the question and make you feel uncomfortable if you're going to feel uncomfortable about it. And she'll ask why the situation is the way that it is. If it's a panel of 5 white guys that show up, she will ask and she will say, in your organization, how are you addressing this? How are you addressing equality for women? How are you addressing equality when it comes to inclusion and diversity? So that is one of the things that actually makes me smile when I wake up in the morning coming to work, because I know I have a champion, and I know I have a champion in my boss, and I know I have a champion around us. So it makes it easier, and then it makes me happy to come here and actually work and understand that I can actually get on screen. To Amber's point, I can get on screen, have a conversation with you, and say absolutely the way that I feel about the situation, without feeling as though there might be an implication, or if she watches this or someone watches this, then there might be an issue for me. No, there isn't. And I am free to say and speak openly, and that's important for us, and that's important for us as an organization.
Well, I hope she watches this. That sounds like an exemplary boss in terms of that leadership, and knitting it into the processes that people encounter in their daily lives is so important for sustaining that kind of approach. So I want to actually turn to organizations now, because we've talked a lot about our behaviors and how we personally, feel and act within organizations, but we can't do it alone just as people. We need the organizational structures. We need our leaders to support it. We need our culture to change and transform. We need our policies to adapt, that kind of thing. So you think about racism as something that's both personal, institutional, and systemic. What do you want to see happen within? I know you both have EDI strategies on the go. What do you want to see happen in your organization so that we really nurture and sustain the kind of organizations that are anti-racist and anti-oppressive?
I'm happy to jump in first, and we're nowhere near where I'd like to be. I wish we were 5 years farther down the road in some ways in terms of things that we're trying to accomplish. But step number one for us is to start to change the way that we measure our performance beyond the just sort of traditional things that we would measure around KPIs for companies, right? And so our step number one is to go to a just label. That is what we're working on right now, and that is a label that comes out of the US that helps to define who we are in a deliberate way and measurable way. And going through the process right now, I tell you, it's not easy, because policy has to change, performance pay has to change, my pay has to change based on, as a CEO, based on how the outcomes of our organization are changing. And to us, quite frankly,
I want to interrupt you. Say it again. Just? Is it just?
The just label. Yeah, JUST. Yeah. So it's kind of like a food label. Yeah, it's like a food label, but for companies. And it's a little bit more prevalent in the US for A&E firms, architectural engineering firms, and we're having a conversation with them right now to turn it in a little bit more Canadian, because the American label is, well, they don't quite get it down there in terms of a lot of things, but their performance criteria is not as advanced as it should be, shall we say, around the running of companies. And so that for us, what it does is it starts to get us to be focused on, okay, if you're going to say that you are a just company, then how are you going to measure that? And then when you start to get into the social justice measurement systems and that actually are going to get us there, that's the hard stuff. Saying that we're going to do it is one thing, but how do we measure our performance on it is another. we're doing that primarily to learn how to become a B corporation, which is our next step, and which is to be high performing and then have an external audit show companies that procure from us, or that companies that we procure we procure services from, or procure from other companies. We need to be able to have an audit that says that we are what we say we are. And that is the B corporation for us, in terms of having that external audit. No different than a financial audit, but now you can actually have an audit where somebody will come, or a safety audit. Somebody comes in from the outside and says, yep, you're doing what it is that you said you're doing, or no, it's not, you're not. And here's how you have to tune up your game. I think that actually starts to set us apart from other organizations, because we can demonstrate that that we are following the right kind of procurement practices, that we are procuring from organizations that believe in animal rights, for example, which is, quite frankly, it was a tough thing for me to swallow right from the very beginning, because how do I measure that? I don't know how I measure that. And my engineering brain says that's really tough to measure. So, but as you start to put your head to it, you actually start to slowly figure these things out. And it takes a couple of years, I think, to go through that. I hope we're there in another 2, but that is a big part of it. And we hope is what happens is that actually starts to reduce the friction between us, and that there might exist between us and our community, us and the people that work with us, our teammates, and also those other companies that hire us. We're so much more transparent, and we want to get to the point where we actually put it on our webpage that says, here's how we perform relative to whatever you'd like to. Here's our analysis. If you'd like to come and look at it, you're welcome. And it's the only way to really get other companies that procure engineering services to see us as being as providing a valuable service that aligns with their own principles as a company.
Yeah. Right. It's a powerful leadership space too. How about anyone else?
But no, I was gonna say, I was gonna put Amber on the spot and say.
I was like, this is a great question.
From the perspective of the organization, obviously, there is a bit of, and I won't say it's bias, but being on the leadership team, one of the things that we have identified, and obviously it's in the forefront, which is what we're talking about here with diversity and inclusion, is figuring out again how to measure it and how it becomes part of our business strategy, and how we embed it in our 5-year plan. We just came up with our 5-year plan last year. This is the first year we're going through it, and we're saying, well, there is a pillar of this 5-year plan that we did not include, and it is diversity and inclusion. So now let's figure out how we do it. And where does it come from? Well, it shouldn't just come from a dialogue that happens between the leadership team and say, well, this is what we think we should include. No, it should come from the organization. It should come from the members of the organization. Let's engage. Let's come up with a term of reference, not by the leaders, but by the organization. Hence the workshop we have coming up on Friday, and say, how are we actually going to embed this and make this part of our strategy moving forward, and part of our business planning. And so from my perspective too, what's important is when we start having that dialogue, the initial dialogue is not about strategy. And I've made it clear, it is about dialogue. Let's start with the dialogue first of all. Let's start by understanding what it is we're talking about. Because if we get into it and just say, well, this is work. Yeah, it is work. And ultimately, we will produce documents that we can include in our business plan or strategy plan that don't mean anything when no one knows what to do with them. Right. So the ultimate thing is we start off with the dialogue. We have the dialogue. We then figure out how we embed that particular system into our strategy, and then bring it up to the right levels, which is our executive team, and then bring it up to the board, and then to the shareholder. The fortunate part that we have as a city-owned corporation is our shareholder is at the forefront of this. So the city of Calgary is at the forefront of this. They've had lots and lots of dialogues. They've put in up a framework that we can follow. So it puts us in an advantaged place and it also puts us in a good situation with working with firms. Specifically, we are having a discussion now, and Williams is here, and an engineering firm, and they're saying these are some of the things that are important to them. So when I look, I'll say, well, we know people are doing it. I've had conversations with the leaders of other organizations. What are you doing if you're going to be
Right.
part of the team, right? What are you doing? You're going to be part of our team. Amber is going to be involved a lot moving forward with also procurement, and so it's important for her to
Mhm.
be asking questions too. So it's from an organizational perspective, I think, and this is where I was going to put you on the spot, Amber. I think we are moving in the right direction. And I was going to ask you your opinion, and you can be honest uh, about where you think CMOC is and how
It's just
CMOC will get
thousands of
there.
people watching.
Yeah,
Be honest,
Sorry,
Amber. This is the time.
yeah, no, no, absolutely. I think we are moving in the right direction. I think I would also build a. I'm going to dodge Cole's question a little bit because I want to talk about what I want to talk about selfishly. Is I want I want this to also extend to past our organization. And like, if we were to talk about the industry a little bit of where I want to see the industry go in 2 years, and one of the big things I would love to see change, and I'm really excited about being vocal about, which internally we have, is how do we think about networking in terms of diversity and inclusion, especially like thinking about things like golfing probably came from a certain socioeconomic background. I don't know, coves in Zimbabwe, they have golfing, and if that's something you learn to do, but it's just, for example, like I just, why are we spending so much time focusing on these types of interactions that are from a very white demographic, socioeconomic class where we try to connect with each other? That doesn't make any sense. And so I would like, I hope as more and more that we can be vocal, certainly at CMLC and within other companies like Williams, that if there are opportunities to have times to connect with industry that aren't, for example, I don't know, going and watching a game and that's taking up 3 or 4 hours, and the fact that maybe we put work, or the culture is to put, not CMLC, but the culture is to put work before family. So what are ways that we can do networking in which we prioritize family, but we maybe go for a walking coffee and talk and network that way? What other opportunities are there? I just find it can be very limited, and it certainly isn't inclusive. Yeah, that's kind of my short part of that.
Sure. Yeah. So, Obi, let me ask you this question, because talking a lot about
Yeah.
building through strategy, building anti-racism, anti-oppression kinds of approaches in our organizations. But Audre Lorde, an activist, said we cannot dismantle with the same tools that we built with. I think maybe I'm misquoting her. I'll get caught in the audience somewhere. But do you know what I mean? That if we're layering
Absolutely.
on what we've already got,
Yeah.
what do we need to
And
dismantle first?
right. And I'm gonna just take bits and pieces of what everyone else has said. So we know there's a goal, like Nassim has said, like with Just, and where we can kind of take a look at what the organization's performance, and then have some sort of metric for the entire organization. But further to that is, how do we actually achieve those goals? And I think that's where the conversations need to start. And I think it's involving and being able to understand the experiences of people that are within that certain demographic. That's where we start from. Once we can share those experiences, we can then start to build solutions that that kind of respond to the experiences. Like Amber said, absolutely. I mean, when we think about social networking industry wide, the typical the networking options that are available are pretty much, it's not it is not something that I typically would want to do, but it's something that I have to do to grow within the network, right? I wouldn't typically go out to play golf. There's a different sports that I'd love to
Mm-hmm.
play, and then it's organizations that understanding and making available other options, and other ways for people to network and to share experiences. And the other thing too, I kind of like to what I feel too, could be a really helpful tool is being able to share and learn about cultures. One of the things that I found is, a lot of people have, and not for, it's just the information isn't there about the behaviors in all, say, for other cultures, or haven't been able to learn those different experiences. So I think when companies start to think about, well, how can I actually educate our employees about, what is it like, to a day in the life of this culture or that culture, and what is personal to those different groups. Once we start to understand that, I think then, people then you'll be able, like, we get to the point where, you can then easily, relate within that culture, because you have a foundational understanding, or you have some understanding of what it is like to live in that culture.
Right, right. I wanted to just pick up a little bit more about that, because it is a lot about, we talked a lot about dialogue and conversation, looking for the ways in which we intersect and as human beings. But there is also the sense that we can, there's a danger in looking for sameness, that there is the need to find that uniqueness, to be able to see differences, to be able to see especially underrepresented groups, that it isn't that we're all one happy family, that people do have unique positions and placements within organizations. That whole idea of intersectionality, the layers of our identity and how they interact with our processes and our structures. So when you think about the outcomes of dialogue, and you think about your organization, the ideal looking organization in a year from now, for example, what do you think will have changed? What will be different when you go to work on Monday, Co? Um, you're now bringing more of yourself to work and feeling more comfortable with that. But in terms of in a year from now, if you were able to do a little bit of forecasting, what would be different about the ways in which we work together?
I think at the core, again, it's we are all human beings, and just understanding who we are as human beings. To Obi's point, if people take the time to try and understand and learn about the other person, and say we're talking from now in the year in, it becomes easier from an organizational perspective to walk in here and just feel as part of the team without having to think you're any different from anyone, and walk, dress, talk, present, engage, network, and have communications with everyone from sort of a level playing field. And from an organizational perspective, I'm lucky, and I'll say that from an organizational perspective, the way that we interact here makes it easier for us to have sort of some of those dialogues. We do have offices. I'm in an office, but most people are out in a cubicle. And one of the things that we've always encouraged from an organizational perspective is we talk. We have cross-functional teams in terms of how we do the work that we do at CMOC. So we have a development team, we have a finance and corporate services team, we have a marketing and communications team. So the idea is that intersection and how we are talking as individuals. But most of that talk has been about work. Most of that talk has been about the safe environment. What's safe to talk about? Let's not talk about things that are making people uncomfortable. My hope is a year from now, everything is safe. We're in a safe environment where if something happens, and something happens in the news over the weekend, it's as much a discussion on Monday as it is about the Oscar Awards. It's as much as a discussion about Super Bowl. It's much a discussion. And so let's have those dialogues. And then there are things that happen in my native country, which is Zimbabwe, that are on the news here in Canada. Fantastic CBC, because they sort of engage and go out throughout the world, and they have reporters everywhere. So they will report on Zimbabwe. But when I walk into the office, I can't talk to anyone about it. But you know what we can talk about? We can talk about what's happening across the border with the United States. I know it impacts us a lot. But if we can get to a point where on CBC, the last 10 minutes, or not the last 10 minutes, the last 30 seconds of the news broadcast is talking about Nigeria, or is talking about Zimbabwe, and we can come and have that dialogue here, just as part of our normal dialogue, then that's something that will show me that people are actually opening up their minds, and they're looking at the world not from just their own world, but a world that encompasses all of us, the world that just is not what you know on a day-to-day basis, but trying to have a world that is wide and open, and you can have conversations about race, about individuals, and just about human beings.
Yeah, if I could also add to that, yes, I absolutely agree. I'm absolutely of the of the opinion that we're all different. We can't say that we're exactly the same. We're the same in the sense of DNA and we being humans, but our experiences are different. I think the major conflict is usually in experience, and I think it's being able to learn and share those experiences and understand the experience of another person and how it differs from what you typically would experience and your expectation, and that's where you start. It automatically bridges the field, and we're more comfortable with sharing space. The other point to the question that I wanted to just add to is something that I'll look out for, say for next year, is this conversation right now is typically termed uncomfortable. Going a year from now, I will hope that this conversation, it's something that is, people are not are uncomfortable to have. I would hope that we could come and talk about it and have a space where well, okay, we see that this is, and there's no easy solution. It's not going to happen within a year. It's not going to happen, but it's that progress where people start to feel more comfortable having these types of conversations and being, understanding that it's not, no one's, there's no label or blame. It's just really creating that environment where everyone eventually feels more comfortable and more productive.
Right. Yeah.
I think one of the wonderful things, I mean, Laura, you mentioned earlier, I've traveled a lot and I've been to different countries, and in the last few years, I've kind of focused on post-conflict countries to take my children to for holidays, because I think it's important to kind of get our kids introduced at a very young age to travel in different cultures, and you see just exactly how the rest of the world lives, and I think it's great for kids to see that, because when they come back, they have a very unique experience that they just simply aren't going to get here. And I'll give you one small example is I didn't believe that you can eat all of a cabbage. Apparently, you take the leaves off and throw it in the garbage and cook sorry, not a cabbage, but a cauliflower. But in Sri Lanka, you chop up the whole thing and you curry the whole thing together, and you eat that because it's food, and nothing goes to waste. And I think that if you transform that to Canada and our culture, the way where we live today, is that if you can go out and travel and meet different people and spend different time together and go and eat with them, go and experience their lives with them, and you realize that there isn't much difference between any of us. We maybe do things differently. We eat, we only eat the inside of the cauliflower, but everybody else also eats the outside. And you realize that, well, hey, actually, there's a lot of nutrition in the outside of the cauliflower, and we're wasting less. And I think that's really what this is all about. At the end of the day, is that racism is a waste. It's a complete waste of an important, limited set of resources we've got to get done what we need to get done as humans. It's a complete waste of everybody's time to be focused on the difference between one person and another when we have so little. When you only have 20 liters of water to drink in 4 days, you don't waste a drop. A single drop you don't waste. And what we're doing right now is we're wasting a lot, because we're spending, this is all good to get to where we want to go. I'm not saying that this is a waste of our time. It's a really important lesson for us to learn how to do things differently. And if we can eliminate it, we, as a human race, I think we'll get so much more done, because we're blowing it all away today for no reason at all.
Yeah, they say.
I want to let Amber have a chance to speak to this question.
I thought that was all well done. Go, Co. You guys covered a great job.
No, I was going to say, what I find is diversity breeds diversity, right? So it's diversity in right now. If you talk about diversity, it's diversity, as we are talking here, in skin color, in experiences, to Obi's point, but it's also diversity in ideas. So if we go back to the point where we're talking about profits in organization and how those trying to create that organizational balance where you're talking about social justice and profits. It's if you have diverse thinking within your organization, I believe strongly that ultimately it will lead to additional profits for the organization, because if you just have one sort of way of thinking around the table, then you're going to stall out, right? You're going to be in a position where you new ideas are coming up and you're not embracing the ideas. And that diversity, yes, it's from gender, from race, from different countries, from experiences, from age, and it is something that as a society we need to embrace. It's something that as organizations we need to begin to understand and sort of embrace and realize. I know even from a CMLC perspective, when we are looking at we just built a new central library, which is now world renowned. But what our team had to do was they had to travel the world. They had to travel the world at some point to go and see what other people have done, right? And to Nassim's point, you go and see what other people are doing, how other people are living, so that you can get ideas to come and be better, do something better, be better as a society. And that's what you do when you build a library. That's what you do when you build an event center. That's what you do when you build something new. That's what you do when you're trying to create new road systems and figure out what's happening in Switzerland, what's happening in Montreal, what's happening everywhere. And if, as a society, we can think of the fact that that's what we do already, it should be easy for us to then open up our minds and say, let's just figure out how we can do it as a human race and share experiences and figure out how we can actually better ourselves moving forward. And so I think that's an important element that we need to embrace. And it won't take a day, it won't take a year, it will take a long time. But the important thing is let's have a dialogue and let's start doing something about it.
Yeah, I think that we can take diversity of thought as a given within our organization because we have so many diverse people. It's how we bring that diversity of thought to bear, right? How people are able to be at the table in a kind of meaningful, authentic way. And I think also the importance of people not being vulnerable by reason of identity. That's another important aspect of inclusion in an organization. So what would you like to do? We're talking about building. I know I'm pressing this point a little bit. Lots of building. What do you need to dismantle?
I could start with this if you don't mind. I think one of the my personal experience one is the preconceived notions. I think the need to pretty much put people in a box and have certain expectations as to how they will behave. This is what they will like. This is how to respond to them, and that was one of the biggest things that I had to shift for me. Growing up, say in Nigeria, it didn't really matter if I wasn't good at sports. I could always just go. I could always just, be good at studying. I could do different things. It didn't really matter. But I find that, say in North America right now, if I told someone, now I play sports anyway, which is still more of the stereotype. But if I did tell someone that, well, I don't like soccer, it's almost like, wow, real, like, it's shocking, right? So one of the things that we need to do is to break down typical stereotypes and learn. Actually, we need to learn about people. So when someone's talking to you and you're going off with a conversation, it's really about what the person is telling you, how they respond to you, and then give the person a chance. You need to understand where the person is coming from, know what the person is comfortable with, rather than just assuming certain having just quick certain assumptions as to who this person is and what they're all about.
Right. We'll start by dismantling stereotypes, preconceived notions.
I totally agree with that. Just to build on what Obi said too, I think it's also about sitting and living with, as a white person, being okay. I should say being okay is about sitting and being uncomfortable in the moment when you do ask about other people's experiences. So it's not that you're looking. I'm not calling Co, and I'm not saying Co. I'm confirmed I'm an okay person. I want to hear what his experience is, listen to it, and sit with the fact that it's very uncomfortable, and then recognize, like, well, what am I going to do to move this forward? I think too what Obi was talking about was taking away that unconscious bias. And what is that unconscious bias? We have something, I don't know, 17, 20,000 thoughts going through our brains every second. And so our brain has to filter through and take in certain decisions and understand and make those decisions in a very short amount of time. And so what are all those, 16,999 other thoughts that form this unconscious bias to make us make a decision in this point of time? And that's a lot of work. That's a lot of time. And that's what we need to do.
Okay. As leaders what do you need to dismantle in terms of structures? What structures have you got right now in your organization that aren't moving this ahead, do you think?
Well, I think often I look at our diversity as an organization, and I wonder whether it's. I mean, we're very diverse ethnically, and but we're not very diverse gender, and so it's really finding a way to slowly and carefully and thoughtfully, not dismantle, but to look at our leadership team and see how it can be. I was going to say tweaked. That's the wrong word, but to be changed over a period of time. It's not we're going to fire somebody because they're not diverse. We're not going to do that if they're obviously productive people, right? But how do you make conscious choices about governance and leadership and management and together to start to make those decisions where it's if we hired person X over person Y, then the team would perform differently, and it would make different decisions, and it would make likely better decisions if it was more diverse from different backgrounds and genders, and I think that would make us a better company. So I think it's a bit of a dismantling the structure a bit, slowly. I'm not talking about tearing down the statue, so to speak, right? That example is. I think that's too destructive for organizations. And maybe it works well in a park somewhere, or if you're or you have some historical figure that that you really want to tear down. I think maybe in some places that works, but in organizations it can be too damaging. It needs to be with purpose and directionally. It needs to be happening as you're making decisions. But I think that's what makes us stronger at the end of the day, is just look at the construct of a company and start to make changes as things and people are turning over in the organization. I think that is where it starts to happen.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think also taking a look at when we go to governance from a board perspective, and governance from a senior management team perspective, and generally going down, and it's looking at who we are today, taking stock of who we are today, and taking stock of how our decision tree works, right? And who is involved in that decision tree, and how do we get ideas in order for us to establish a strategy, to establish how we move forward, and then saying, if we made some conscious changes to these decisions that we're making, or how we make these decisions, what does that look like? What does that look like? And from my perspective, and I think I said what I meant by the fact that I am lucky, there is some diversity in the team that I work with from a senior management level team. I'm the only male, and I am the only person of color, but my other leadership team members are female, brilliant in what they do. We used to have a male in it, and they have since left, but I find that we've already done something that we've done there, that we've already made a change. We know that the change was made in order for us to have such a team, but we have a position where we started, and a position as to where we're going, and how the collaboration within the team is happening, how the collaboration happened before, and how we can further move forward and continue to improve that as a team. And the idea that we all can sit down and actually have honest conversations with each other is another big step and another big start to it. But just making sure that we are building some of these things and some of these conversations and embedding them into who we are as an organization, I think is an important start. And also then looking at how we are serving the community. I mean, we have to serve the community in the right way. And as an organization that one of our mandate is to serve the community, we need to figure out who our community is, and we need to figure out how we can better understand them. We are,
Mm-hmm.
we are on indigenous land. We have indigenous leaders that around us. How do we engage with them? How do we
Mm-hmm.
ensure we are respecting their culture? How do we make sure that we are also understanding who who they are as leaders and who they are as human beings, and then start to embed that in our system and make sure that it's not just focused in one direction about one thing. It's focused in ensuring that as an organization we are diverse and we're inclusive in all aspects.
Great. Well, I think we're nearing the end of our, regrettably, nearing the end of our time together. I'm thinking about the work I've done for many years and how there used to be such a separation between the personal and the professional that you never let anything personal come through the doorway of work, the workplace. And I hear the leaders talking and your colleagues about how it is that this is a completely different landscape now if we want to maximize our participation, if we want to maximize our personhood within organizations and maximize our success. So it's a really exciting opportunity, I think, that you've all been talking about, and I'm very thankful that you spent this time with me and with the audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.